Welcome to one of the past HSC exam question videos. In this video, we're going to cover this exam question, which comes from the 2006 paper, and it's question 28 of that paper, and it's worth 6 marks, and there's 3 parts to it. What I'll do in a second, I'll read the actual question. Once I read the question, about 5 seconds pause the video. Once you pause the video, attempt the question, and press play when you're ready. The question itself, A, says a gardener notes a red and swollen area on his arm that had received a deep scratch from a thorn on a plant. Identify the most likely human defense adaptation that caused these symptoms. That's worth 1 mark. After a number of days, the gardener's arm remained red and swollen, so he visited his doctors who prescribed an antibiotics to treat the infection. Why did the doctor prescribe an antibiotics to treat this infection? That's worth 1 mark as well. And the gardener should have taken the antibiotics for 10 days, but stopped after 5 days because his arm was no longer red or swollen. Explain how this action by the gardener might lead to antibiotic resistance. And that's worth 4 marks. So when you're ready, pause the video and attempt the question, and then I'll go over the answer itself. Welcome back. Alright, so for A, all it says you need to identify the most likely defense adaptation. So not just any, but the most likely. So identify correct will get you 1 mark out of 1. Alright, so in this case, it will most likely be an inflammation response, because the reason being, the inflammation response causes swelling and pain as observed in the gardener. So it has a swollen, red and swollen area, which is a symptom or sign of inflammation. Alright, so next one is, after a number of days, the gardener's arms remain swollen. Why did the doctor prescribe the actual antibiotics? So here, identify the bacteria as a source of infection. So thereby, it could have been possibly a bacteria infection. Right? So infection could have been bacterial infection, which can be treated by antibiotics. That's all you have to write for this one to get you 1 mark out of 1. And then the last one is, the gardener should have taken the antibiotics for 10 days but stopped. How could this lead to antibiotic resistance? So first, you should say that because it's worth 4 marks, you basically need to explain how antibiotic resistance can develop and start from natural selection, right? So say there's variation in any population, that should be an important statement, right? Which means there's some more resistant bacteria and some less resistant bacteria. Then what you can talk about is that if you take antibiotics, especially initially, that will kill all the less resistant bacteria, they will die first. But if you don't do the complete course, if you stop before it's completed, that means you might have the more resistant ones being more resistant, thereby they might survive unless you take the complete course. And how can that lead to resistance? Well, those more resistant ones will then reproduce, and when they reproduce, we've got antibiotic resistance, right? So that's basically what you should have said to get you 4 marks out of 4, because so you have to link to failure to complete the course of antibiotics with how natural selection leads to antibiotic resistance. You need to talk about how natural selection works and link that to the failure of antibiotic taking the whole course and how that can lead to that antibiotic resistance. So what I wrote is, there's a variation of genes within any species, and some members of a bacteria species might have genes that make them more resistant to specific antibiotics, while others are less resistant. This is just saying that, again, there's variation. Some are more resistant, some are less resistant. That's all that said. First statement. And then taking antibiotics will kill the least resistant pathogens first, as the more resistant bacteria are more resilient and will survive for longer, right? If the full course of antibiotics is not completed, then these more resistant bacteria might not be killed off, which allows them to reproduce. So here we've linked the two together, failure to take the full course plus how natural selection works. And the last statement would have been, in the long term, this will result in a species where most of its members are resistant to antibiotics, and thereby produce antibiotic resistance to that specific antibiotic. Right? So that's it. Linking it all together and saying how not taking a full course can cause natural selection to make the actual bacteria evolve into a resistant bacteria. And where this come from? They came from these different dot points. So first one, most likely defense adaptation, is this dot point talks about second line defense, and there is inflammation response there, so you need to know about that inflammation response. The next one is how can we know how to treat it? Identify the role of antibiotics as a number or a management of infectious disease. This is saying that antibiotic treatment can be used to treat bacterial infections. And the last one was here, where I discussed the problems relating to antibiotic resistance. And it was also a dot point in a different module which talks about how antibiotic resistance actually develops. So this is where all this comes from. But hopefully that was useful.